Hey, it's me, Saul. So I've been playing ranked with the Bujins, trying to get to King of Games before I finish this 101 series to see how good the Bujins can really be. But it's getting late, so I thought, you know what, I might as well make the next installment in the series. So today we're going to be talking about Necrovalley and what the Bujins have to say about it. Now, I should say that when I say Necrovalley, well, Necrovalley is the key card that we're going to be talking about today, but that's not exactly the whole picture. Now, Necrovalley is basically the poster child for any card or effect or just deck type that negates your opponent's graveyard. So when I say Necrovalley, I don't just mean that specific card. What I'm really saying is, what do the Bujins do when they're stacked up against a deck that negates their access to the graveyard? Now, if you haven't watched the previous two videos that I've done on the Bujins, I highly advise that you check them out before you watch this. It gives a lot of context as to who the Bujins are, what the Bujins do, the things you have to take into account when you are building a Bujin deck. It will really help you along before getting to this point, because this is more of the tech side after you have built your Bujin deck, at least to an extent, and you're trying to think of an out to one of your biggest weaknesses. Now, assuming that you are here and you have watched that video, let's pick it up from here. So personally, I don't actually own Necrovalley. I've always wanted to get one and just see what a Gravekeeper's deck would be like, and someday I might do that. But Necrovalley, here it is. Now, what this card says is all Gravekeeper's monsters gain 500 attack and defense. That's not what most people use this card for, but regardless, cards in the graveyard cannot be banished. Negate any card effect that would move a card in the graveyard to a different place. Negate any card effect that changes types or attributes in the graveyard. So what this card effectively says is cut both players off from any graveyard effects. If it's a monster effect, if it's a spell effect, trap effect, no matter what it is, once it hits the graveyard, if Necrovalley is on the field, it stays there, right? Now, for an archetype that relies very heavily on its Bujingi monsters, as we've discussed previously, let me pull them up for you. So, as you've seen from the previous videos, a lot of the meta-relevant Bujingi cards activate their effects from the graveyard. The Sinew banishes itself from the graveyard and it can boost your attack to any value in the game. The Hair banishes itself from the graveyard and makes it so that you can't be destroyed once per turn. Quilling gets banished to pop any face-up card on the field. The Centipede banishes to destroy any spell and trap. The Boar will banish to turn your opponent's monsters to defense position. The Fox will banish itself to negate any damage you might take this turn. The Turtle banishes itself to negate your opponent's targeting effects once per turn. Most of the very meta-relevant effects rely on the graveyard, and so if you've built a Bujin deck relying on these effects and you get put up against Necrovalley or any deck that negates your graveyard, well, you'll most likely find yourself in a significant degree of trouble if you're not prepared for it. Now, why do people use Necrovalley in today's meta? So, if you look at the most popular cards at the time of me making this video, of course, the ban list that's coming up on the 15th has been announced, and so a lot of the cards that would normally be on this list of the most popular cards in the meta are no longer appearing as fervently. Is that the right word? Anyway, the card Necrovalley locks a lot of meta decks out of their graveyards. Shiranui, for example. Shiranui relies heavily on the graveyard to make their plays. Another card that relies heavily on the graveyard is Kiteroid. The Noble Knights send a lot of their cards to the graveyard in order to, add them back and attach them to their monsters after they get destroyed. And so on and so forth. Witchcrafters abused the graveyard because they could just mill all of their cards to the graveyard and pop off in ridiculous ways. Even Blue Eyes uses a graveyard to an extent. So the ability to lock your opponent off of their graveyard, which is basically locking them off of 1/3 of their resources, well, it's an extremely powerful effect, and it's one that a lot of people have started carrying with them because of the existence of these meta decks. Now, the problem for the Bujins in this situation is these graveyard negation effects have been run to stop the strongest decks in the meta, but it doesn't really stop the strongest decks in the meta. Shiranui, while it gets locked off for most of its comeback plays, it's still extremely strong. It can still get massive monsters on the field. It can still do a lot of different things without banishing cards. Same with Blue Eyes, same with Noble Knights, same with Dark Magician, same with most of the decks that you see in the meta. They can function without their graveyards. It's just a massive inconvenience. The Bujins rely a lot more on it than these guys do, and so finding a way to avoid being stunted by the graveyard negation is an essential factor to building a consistent Bujin deck. Ignore the fact that I don't have most of these cards, by the way. I just noticed that and made me feel bad about myself, but we're gonna move on. You know, I just thought of another archetype that just gets very, very much locked down by loss of access to their graveyard. Cyber Dragons. Like, I can think of so many off the top of my head. It's ridiculous. Everyone needs a graveyard. Anyway, moving on. What you're looking at is an OG Bujin deck. I showed it to you in one of the previous videos. This is the type of Bujin deck that I used to run where I milled as many cards as I could to the graveyard in order to pop off with their effects. This deck would be destroyed by any deck running a Necrovalley-like effect, right? Because the entire reliance is on the graveyard. No matter what, the Bujins will always be tied to the graveyard in some way, shape, or form. So it will still be a concern, but it is something that can be worked around, and I'm going to try my best to show you ways of going about that in this video. So there was a day, let me give you a little bit of background before I explain how the Bujins get around Necrovalley. Whenever I come back to Duel Links, I've been playing for a couple of years, I take breaks, I come back, but I try and update my existing decks to try and, you know, have them fit into the meta, see if I can still play with them, and the Bujins, being so adaptable, have pretty much been one of the only decks that I've always been able to adapt to fit into a meta. So I had come back into Duel Links, I had been playing normally, the KC Cup was coming up, and I decided that I needed to force my deck to evolve. I needed to force myself to evolve in the way that I played the Bujins, especially because XYZ summons had just been released, and I needed to think of unique and interesting ways to use these new cards to my advantage to speed up the deck as much as possible. Not only did I need to speed up the deck, but if I wanted to compete in today's meta, I knew that I had to overcome one of the greatest weaknesses that this deck would face. The fact that everyone was now running graveyard negation. My friend Axel and I sat down one day and he helped me out with this. By the way, he streams. You totally go check out his streams. I'll leave a link in the description, but effectively, he has an amazing Gravekeeper's deck, and the Bujins I had only managed to beat that deck with my old Bujin deck once. And that was not good enough in my opinion. So one day I asked him to sit down with me, and we sat down. It was the most anime thing you've ever seen. I was like, look, dude, I need to power up my Bujin deck, but I can't think of anything. Can you just bring a wall? Just act as a massive iron wall that I can smash into over and over and over again until I think of a solution. And for some reason, he agreed to help me with this. So we literally just sat down for like an hour or two. He was just using the same deck over and over and over again. I told him not to hold back, and he didn't. He would just beat me. I would go back to the drawing board. Beat me again. I would go back to the drawing board. I would move cards around. I would take things out. I would add things back in. I was trying everything that I could think of to figure out how to get around his Necrovalley. My thought process was that if I could get around Necrovalley, the poster child for graveyard negation, then my deck would be fast enough and strong enough to compete with any cards that were trying to negate my graveyard. And that was when I came up with the XYZ Bujin Double Jump deck, the one that you're looking at right now. It's been amended a little bit since that instance, but it's roughly this. It's the same concept, it's the same idea, so I'm going to explain it to you. Now, in case you were wondering what my deck looked like before me and Axel started throwing hands, this was the current deck list of the Bujins that I was running. I had Hirume in there to help me get my XYZ summons out faster. I had Ties with the Brethren to try and swarm the field, and I ran a copy of the Fox to make it so that I was a bit safer when going into my plays. I had some back row disruption, but I was relying almost exclusively on the graveyard Bujin effects. What I ended up finding out though, and there's a video on my channel where if you look at it, you see me go up against his Necrovalley deck, and that was the one time I managed to beat him, is that yes, your graveyard gets locked down, but you still have access to a variety of hand trap Bujins that people just don't often consider despite how strong they are. And the hand trap Bujins are more viable than ever thanks to Bujente Susano. The reason for that is, if you ever wanted to use a hand trap before, it had to be the Crane, because the Crane can be activated on your opponent's turn relatively easily, and it has an amazing effect. With the other hand traps, well, it didn't really work with the deck. Imagine you have Yamato on the field and he's the only card that you have on the field. Now, during your end phase, you can add a monster from your hand to from your deck to your hand rather, and then send a card from your hand to the graveyard. Now, let's say you're in a last-ditch situation where you don't have any other monsters in your hand, you don't have any other cards in your hand, you can't use any of the hand trap Bujins. Because one, this effect only activates in the end phase, and two, you have to send whatever you added from your deck to your hand to the graveyard. And let me just add that yes, with the crane, if that got added to your hand, that would also have to be sent to the graveyard. But if there was anything else in your hand, it would be worth it to send it to the graveyard because the crane is just that strong. You could justify sending anything else at your disposal to the graveyard if you have the crane. Plus, the crane works hand in hand with sinew. So if you're in a situation where you need to boost your attack and you have a card in your hand, you can get the crane to your hand and send a different card to the graveyard. Or if you have nothing in your hand, you can just use sinew instead. So in terms of attack power, you are covered with that combo. The other hand trap Bujins did not have that benefit. So yeah. So all that really made sense to use were the graveyard Bujins within the archetype. Susano fixes that problem because during your main phase, you can choose any card in your deck and either add it to your hand or send it to the graveyard, meaning that you get to be extremely selective with the effects that you pick and choose to play with during a given duel. You can get any effect in the deck. Now, couple that with the fact that I was already running some hand traps without thinking anything of it, for instance the crane, but also Mikazuchi and Arasuda. Whenever you're going up against a Necrovalley deck, if Mikazuchi's in your hand, it's not the same as having a hare in the graveyard to protect you, for instance. But if your Yamato gets destroyed, Mikazuchi can still special summon himself even though Necrovalley is on the field. So that got me thinking about the other hand traps in the deck and what I could do and how I could make them work. So I went through and I read all of them and I saw what they were about, and I realized, let me actually go to where all of them are. What I ended up realizing was that some of them are actually quite good, and so I noted specifically the Bujingi Swallow and Bujingi Ophidian. Now, what the Ophidian does is allow you to attack your opponent directly if you send this card from your hand to the graveyard. You target one Bujin monster, it can attack directly. What the Swallow allows you to do is target one Bujin monster, send this card from your hand to the graveyard. One monster can attack twice in a row this turn. Now, combine these two cards using the effect of Bujin Susano. Imagine one is in your hand and the other one gets drawn from your deck. You can now attack for game so long as your opponent doesn't have any back row to stop you. So, with that in mind, that's why it's called the Bujin double jump strat. You jump over your opponent's monster twice. With that in mind though, the deck that I'm currently running doesn't look that way now, does it? Now, the reason for that is combining two different winged beast monsters is more situational than you would expect. Getting both of those very specific cards in your hand at a very specific point in the duel, not as easy as it might seem, because Susano can only activate once per turn, and like I said, Yamato only activates in the end phase, so the setup for this was relatively difficult. In order to make it more consistent, I dropped the Swallow and I just ran two Bujingi Ophidians, meaning that at any given point in the duel, if I have successfully potentially craned over my opponent or done anything that reduces their life points enough, I can just boost right over them with my Susano and go for game. That's 2,400 damage roughly that I can just apply directly to their life points. Now, I chained this with Fire Formation Gyoku in order to lock down their back row, and if they don't have a Sphere Kuribo in the hand with their back row locked down, it's most likely that I'm going to be able to go for game. So the way to use the Bujins in a situation where you've lost access to your graveyard is to not use your graveyard. Now, adding these two cards to my deck, it really didn't clog it up because, like I said, it's only two cards, and even outside of the Necrovalley situation, it's a very useful set of cards to have. For instance, going up against Cocytus stopped being a problem because you don't have to destroy Cocytus anymore. With this card in your deck, you could just attack over Cocytus twice, and you've won the game so long as you've dealt with their back row. So long as you've dealt with any other effects that might negate your direct attack, you can win the game with Ophidian by itself. So, with this in mind, my Bujin deck is catered to specifically surviving in situations where I've lost access to my graveyard. I do make use of graveyard effects, specifically the hare, the Quillin, and Sinew. Originally, I was running Sinew at 2, but I've brought him down to 1 because I added the hare in. And so by minimizing the amount of graveyard effects that I actually need to use and creating a strategy that revolves around something that doesn't require me to use my graveyard, I'm able to basically ignore the fact that my graveyard has been negated. In fact, my opponent might put themselves at a disadvantage trying to lock me out of my graveyard, and it won't really matter to me. What I'm going to do is I'll show you a duel where exactly this happens. I'll probably chain it at the end of the video after I'm done talking. I hope this hasn't been too long, and I hope this has been informative and helpful to you. But yeah, that is, in my opinion, the best way to deal with Necrovalley. Find a way over it. There are definitely other ways it exists within the deck. For instance, just run spell and trap removal that doesn't exist within the archetype. But I'm a stickler for trying to see what an archetype can do on its own. I wanted to see what options existed within the archetype to solve the problem rather than relying on external meta support. Now, that's not to say that I don't use anything from outside the archetype like World Legacy Clash, but it fits perfectly into my strategy because it ties in with Bujin Carnation. So rather than just going Karma Cut or going Floodgate Trap Hole or Raigeki Break, I wanted to try and be as creative as possible. So that's how I ended up in this situation. Final things to note, you probably already know this, but if your graveyard is being negated, in a lot of situations you've lost access to roughly a quarter to half of the effects in your deck. Bujin Carnation will not work, so these two cards are no longer effective. Furthermore, Tsukuyomi's effect to discard a card and draw cards, well, that will still work, but if Tsukuyomi gets destroyed, he's not going to float into 2 Bujins from your graveyard anymore. On top of that, you can't use your hair, you can't use your Quillin, you can't use your Sinew. The Fox also no longer works, so as you can see here, you are running with a much smaller deck if you do end up running into any graveyard negation. But it's not an impossible situation anymore. These cards alone that you're looking at on the screen are enough to deal with Necrovalley, to deal with graveyard negation. Now, some situations are just too hard to come back from, and when you've lost, you've lost. It's a GG. You can learn to accept that, and it's okay. No deck always wins, but in my opinion, I found a pretty decent way to get around that core flaw of the Bujins. Now, you can do it my way or you can do it yours. Whatever you choose, I hope you enjoy using the deck. I hope you're enjoying the series where I'm explaining the Bujins to you. Please consider subscribing so you can, be notified and see the rest of the series when it comes out. And I'm bad at ending videos. Bye.
Duel Disc, go! Duel Gazer, let's roll!
I have foreseen that this duel will end in your defeat, and you cannot escape your destiny.
Duel! Here goes. My turn. I set a monster. I end my turn.
My turn. I draw. My field spell card activates. Necrovalley. I set a card on the field. I set a monster. I end my turn.
Here goes. My turn. I draw.
Go, Yuma!
Yeah! I summon a monster.
I knew you would do that. I activate a face-down card. My continuous trap activates.
I activate my monster's effect. I end my turn.
What should our next move be?
My turn. I draw. Arrive! Gravekeeper's Spy! Gravekeeper's Spy's effect activates. Come to me, Gravekeeper's Priestess! What shall I play? I summon a monster in attack position. My monster's effect activates. Watch and learn. I fusion summon a monster. My monster's effect activates. Let us battle. Allow me to proceed. My monster attacks.
Now! I activate my monster's effect.
Here I go. I shall attack you with my monster. I end my turn.
My turn.
No, it's my turn. I draw.
Go, Yuma!
Yeah! I summon a monster. I'll play this. I build the overlay network. I exceed summon. activate my monster's effect.
No!
I end my turn.
Do not let your guard down like you usually do, Yuma.
It's my turn. I draw. I set a card face down on the field. Now, I summon a monster in attack position. My continuous spell activates. Hidden Temples of Necrovalley. Let us battle. Allow me to proceed. I shall attack.
Nothing I can't handle.
My turn comes to an end.
You have the winning formula in hand. Go and execute it.
Right. It's my turn. I draw. I'll play this. I summon a monster.
I activate my trap card, Rite of Spirit. I revive a Gravekeeper from my graveyard. Watch and learn. I special summon a monster.
I activate my monster's effect.
I've lost. This was unexpected, but most impressive.
I'll never give up, as long as I feel the flow.
Time to get my motor running.
Duel Disc, go! Duel Gazer, let's roll!
A true duelist takes on all challenges, so I'll take you on.
Duel!
Here I go. It's my turn. I set a monster face down. I end my turn.
My turn.
No, it's my turn. I draw.
Go, Yuma.
Yeah! I summon a monster. From my hand, I activate a spell card. Let's go. I special summon a monster. Let's go. I special summon a monster. I set a card. I activate my monster's effect. I activate my monster's effect. I activate my monster's effect. No matter how bad it gets, I never give up. I end my turn.
Well said, Yuma. But you are still in quite the predicament.
Watch what I can do. It's my turn. Draw. From my hand, my field spell activates.
Now, I activate my monster's effect.
I set a monster. Let's battle. I end my turn. You're up.
You have not lost yet, Yuma. So do me a favor and duel.
Yeah. It's my turn. I draw. Let's go. I build the overlay network. I exceed summon. I'm feeling the flow. Let's go. I summon a monster. I activate my monster's effect. I activate my monster's effect.
Stay focused, Yuma.
Don't worry about me. Let's battle. Go! Take this direct attack.
I don't like my odds.
I activate my monster's effect. No matter how bad it gets, I never give up. I end my turn.
Well said, Yuma. But you are still in quite the predicament.
This duel ain't looking too good for me. My turn. I draw. Okay. I summon a monster in attack position. My monster's effect activates. From my hand, I activate a spell. Okay. I fusion summon a monster. I activate a spell. Battle! Alright, you asked for it. My monster's gonna attack!
At this moment,
Check out my set card. I activate a quick play spell.
Guess my turn's done.
you have not lost yet, Yuma. So do me a favor and duel.
Yeah. It's my turn. I draw. Watch what we can do together.
Our strengths combine into one.
I activate my monster's effect. I activate my monster's effect.
Stay focused, Yuma.
Don't worry about me. Let's battle. Take this. Take this direct attack.
You win some, you lose some. But man, I hate losing.
I'll never give up, as long as I feel the flow.